Russia's invasion of Ukraine has to go down as the most catastrophic failed attempt to take over another country in modern military history. And that failure is only getting worse. Something is wiping out Russian troops like never before in Ukraine, as they have experienced a hellish 3 months that have wiped out tens of thousands of soldiers. A staggering 89,000 Russian soldiers are gone, just like that, during the first quarter of 2026. And Russia is now grappling with the largest troop losses in modern history at a time when its recruitment network is crumbling. Let's start with that headline figure: 89,000 Russian casualties in 3 months. That figure was reported by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy during a press conference at the end of March, and it shows us everything that is wrong with Russia's military. It means that Putin has sacrificed an average of 29,666 of Russia's people every month since the beginning of 2026. And bear in mind that January and February were still cold months. Russia's offensive actions would have slowed down during these months, only to ramp up in March as the vaunted spring offensive began. Therefore, it seems likely that the last of the 3 months is also the month when Russia experienced its highest number of confirmed casualties. What does that tell us? That it's only going to get worse from here. The most insane thing about this statistic is that it looks like it should be a record for the number of confirmed losses that Russia has suffered over a 3-month period, but somehow it isn't. Between November 2025 and January 2026, Russia's losses reached almost 100,000, as Putin's forces attempted to complete their push against Krovsk and were left increasingly isolated in the freezing cold conditions in Ukraine, which made them easier targets for Ukraine's drones and its search and destroy squads that were formed to tackle Russia's infiltration strategy. As crazy as it sounds, this means that 89,000 confirmed losses during the first 3 months of 2026 are actually an improvement for Russia. Well, it's not much of an improvement. And the scale of these losses is being combined with another major issue for Russia, which is a war ender behind the statistics we're sharing. We'll come back to that soon. First, there's a word that we've been using that is worth paying attention to. We've said confirm several times when talking about Russia's losses in 2026 so far, and that's a big clue that 89,000 casualties is likely the best-case scenario for Russia's first quarter of 2026. United 24 Media points out, as it reports that the head of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, Robert Brovdy, has already pointed out that 20% of the strikes that Ukraine carried out against Russia during the first 3 months of 2026 can't be verified. This doesn't mean that Ukraine can't verify that the strikes were successful. It can. The drones it's using to make those strikes, as well as the army of reconnaissance drones that it has flying in the skies, offer all the proof needed that the hits are landing. What Ukraine can't quite verify is just how many of Russia's soldiers are being killed in these strikes. When Ukraine hits a concentration of troops with drones, it can't record all of the soldiers who get killed indirectly by shrapnel and explosions. Ukraine's figures also don't include casualties that are being caused by its mid-range drone strikes, artillery attacks, and things like the number of Russians who are dying under rubble or being killed in ways that Ukraine can't confirm through direct video evidence. And here's where it gets really bad for Russia. The amount of territory that Russia has been capturing in return for this ridiculous casualty rate is declining rapidly. And it's not like Russia was doing well on that front before. If we rewind to 2025, United 24 Media reports that Putin churned through around 400,000 of Russia's soldiers in return for just 4,336 square kilometers or 1,674 square miles of Ukraine. That's a return of just 0.72% of the territory of a country in which Russia still has to find a way to take the remaining 80% of free land. At this rate, it would take Russia a century to finally topple Ukraine, meaning Putin and whichever warmonger who succeeds him would be long gone before the aims of the so-called special military operation are fulfilled. But even that century of war is starting to look ambitious on Russia's end, as its rate of advance has been slowing drastically since the end of 2025. According to the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, the period between October 2025 and March 26 saw Russia seize almost 1,930 square kilometers, or about 745 square miles of Ukraine. It's bad enough that this is drastically lower than the same period between 2024 and 25, when Russia captured about 2,716.6 square kilometers, or 1,048 square miles. That alone showcases the massive slowdown, but now we have an approximate figure for the number of casualties that Russia has sustained to make those paltry gains. We've shared the 89,000 and 100,000 figures already. There's some crossover here as January 2026 is included in both. If we subtract about 30,000, which is Russia's rough monthly casualty rate in 2026, from the 189,000 total we have, thus eliminating the double January issue. We get 159,000 casualties, but there's more. The ISW's figures include October 2025. United 24 media reports that Ukraine confirmed 25,000 kills of Russian soldiers in October. That figure doesn't include casualties or unconfirmed kills, but it's the best we have. And we can add it to the 159,000 casualties to make 184,000 for the 6-month period that the ISW covers. Divide 184,000 casualties by 745 square miles gained, and Putin gets slapped in the face with a reality that he can't comprehend. Russia is losing just under 247 soldiers for every square mile of Ukraine that it gains. This is generational atrophy of an entire population for the sake of fractions of a percentage of Ukrainian territory, and it's starting to weigh very heavily on Russia's military. And somehow there is even more on the Russian casualty front. Any hope that Putin might have that the casualty rate will slow down later in 2026 is ridiculous. Russia has already launched its spring offensive, which means that more assaults are happening now than at any other point in the year. And with more assaults comes even more casualties. We've seen that already in March. On March 17th, Russia broke its record for most casualties suffered in 2026 so far, when a staggering 1,710 of its soldiers were taken out in 24 hours. Adding to that was the loss of 230 vehicles and fuel tankers, along with 29 artillery systems. And that figure alone shows a sharp increase over the 700 to 900 daily losses that Russia was incurring earlier in the year. If you want a little more context, then Russia is now losing more soldiers every 2 days than the US lost during its entire war in Afghanistan. Russia has its own Afghanistan war on its record, during which it lost 15,000 soldiers over the course of a decade. So it's losing about that much every half a month in Ukraine. This is a preposterous figure that shows how Putin, for all of his love of the Soviet era of old, can't even wage a failing war as well as the Soviet leaders who came before him, never mind a war that Russia could actually win. So Russia has 89,000 soldiers gone, eliminated, wiped off the face of the map in just the first 3 months of 2026. And the territorial gains that it's been making for those massive losses are so tiny that they are barely worth talking about. Throw the start of the spring offensive into the mix and you get a powder keg of future casualties that is ready to blow up in Putin's face. But earlier we mentioned another problem that is combining with these issues to make things so much worse for Russia. This is an issue that takes things from catastrophic to war ending for Putin, as it will change everything about the future of the war. Russia's major problem isn't that it's just losing thousands upon thousands of soldiers. That's backbreaking for the Russian military, but it's also something that's been happening for years. The real issue for Russia right now is the scale of its losses is such that it's failing to recruit enough soldiers to account for them for the first time since Putin launched his invasion. United 24 media reports that Russia's arrivals to departures balance has been in the negative for 4 consecutive months between December 2025 and March 26. What this means is that Russia has experienced 4 months where it's losing more soldiers than it's recruiting. The same outlet adds that Russia has a target of recruiting 409,000 soldiers by the end of 2026, and it's faltering there too. After the first quarter of 2026, Russia should be 25% of the way toward hitting that target. It isn't. Russia has only managed to recruit about 80,000 new soldiers, which amounts to 22% of the target. You don't need us to tell you that 80,000 recruits is less than 89,000 casualties. However, there is a little more maths we can do here. If Russia aims to hit 409,000, then 89,000 casualties every 3 months isn't enough to cause the type of attrition that keeps Russia in the red when it comes to troop numbers. Multiply 89,000 by 4 and you get 365,000. An insane number of losses for sure, but low enough to give Russia a 50,000 plus surplus. But there are a few problems with that. The first is the 22% of the target hit when it should be 25%. That tells us that Russia isn't hitting its recruitment quotas, so 409,000 for 2026 is starting to look a little ambitious. We'll come back to that in a moment. Second problem is one that we've mentioned before. It's 89,000 confirmed casualties, not 89,000 total. That means Russia's casualty count is likely a few thousand, perhaps even tens of thousands higher than what it can verify, which suddenly means that even the target of 409,000 isn't enough. And third, Ukraine is just getting started. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has set a target of 50,000 Russian casualties per month by the end of 2026. Ambitious, yes. Ukraine is about 20,000 away from hitting that target based on its confirmed casualties, but as Russia ramps up its spring offensive, the casualty count will rise. What we're seeing now is the best that Russia can hope for in 2026. And it's still so devastating that Russia can't keep up with it via recruitment. It's becoming increasingly clear that the method that Russia has used to recruit volunteer soldiers up to this point isn't working as well as it used to. That method was simple: throw more cash at potential recruits than they've ever seen in their lives to convince them to fight and die in Ukraine. But as Russia falls behind its targets as that method fails, it's turning to more desperate approaches. Business Insider highlighted one of those approaches in an April 1st article that must have felt like a bad April Fool's joke for any Russians who somehow made it through Putin's net restrictions to read it. One governor in the Ryazan region of Russia is telling businesses that they need to help out with recruitment as the numbers plummet. Now, any firm in that region that has between 150 and 500 workers has until September to submit the names of employees that they think should be sent to the front lines in Ukraine. Companies with between 150 and 300 employees must submit 2 candidates, while those with between 300 and 500 must send 5 names. Any businesses that refuse to follow these rules will face a 1 million ruble fine, which works out to a little over $12,000. Russia is also taking aim at its young students as potential recruits for its military. Also in an April 1st report, The Times says that Valery Falkov, who is Russia's education and science minister, has ordered Russia's universities to convince 2% of their students to sign up for the military. If the orders are carried out successfully, this would lead to an influx of 44,000 new soldiers, or 76,000 if Russia includes colleges alongside universities. This is stealth conscription at its most desperate, and it's not exactly very smart, is it, Putin? Russia is a country that is already dealing with a massive labor crisis brought on in part by the demands that the Kremlin has placed on the Russian people since Putin invaded Ukraine. On March 30th, United 24 Media reported that over 20 of Russia's factories in the Leningrad region alone are shifting to 3-day work weeks, and this isn't a coincidence. Work is drying up, and those companies can't maintain the number of employees that they otherwise would. Putin has created a vicious cycle inside Russia where the available labor gets sucked up by the war machine, which ruins every other industry and places much of Russia's declining population in a position where it can't contribute to the economy in any other way than submitting to Putin's war effort. And now Russia is trying to pull employed people out of work when it doesn't have anybody to replace them, along with sacrificing the students who should be preparing to become the foundation of Russia's post-war economy. Putin is ruining Russia's future in exchange for short-term fixes to a manpower problem that is only going to get worse. And what he's gearing up to do next is going to catch everybody in Russia off guard. Not satisfied with the workers and the students, Putin is edging closer to higher levels of conscription, which in turn will lead to mobilization inside Russia. The Kremlin started preparing for all of this in 2025 when Putin signed a new law that transformed Russia's previous conscription system, which had 2 annual drafts, to a year-round system that means Russia can call up anyone aged between 18 and 30 at any time for a year-long period of military service. Russia claims that it won't be bulking up its number of conscripts, but you can never take that type of claim seriously. And of course, every conscript, assuming they're not just sent to the front lines, even though Russia says that conscripts don't go to Ukraine, will become a reserve. And that leads into the second part of the Kremlin's plan to deal with its manpower deficiencies. In a March 30th report, United 24 Media says that the poor results of the Ministry of Defense's latest recruitment campaigns are leading Putin down the path of turning voluntary recruitment into involuntary mobilization. A limited and rolling reserve call-up scheme is reportedly being prepared, which is the type of move that Putin has spent most of his war avoiding after a September 2022 partial mobilization proved extremely unpopular in Russia. The groundwork has already been laid. Putin is preparing to do something so stupid that it amounts to an admission that what he's been calling the special military operation for so many years is actually a war that Russia isn't winning. He doesn't want to do it, not because he cares about the Russian people, but because Putin knows that the uproar that mobilization will cause could be a threat to the seat of power that he spent a quarter of a century defending. But if Putin wants to keep his invasion going, especially as Ukraine tears through Russian soldiers faster than ever before, then he has no choice. He's already exhausting Russia's stockpile of criminals that he can send to the front, and when it comes to volunteers, the percentages are too low, and Russia is running low on the cash that it was otherwise using to incentivize them to sign up in the first place. The regions being forced to bankroll that approach, of which the previously mentioned Ryazan is one, are starting to run out of money. Financial incentives, which once ran as high as $40,000 for sign-up bonuses in some Russian regions, are also running dry. Bonuses are now being reduced in many regions, the Kyiv Post reports, and it's because those regions, shockingly enough, kind of need some money to spend on things other than sending more cannon fodder Putin's way. So we see a confluence of issues. Ukraine has become a more effective Russian military destroying machine than it ever has before. The drone-infested kill zones that cause so many problems for Russia are tripling in size due to the introduction of middle-range strike drones. And by the end of 2025, Ukraine was building 4 million drones per year to fill those kill zones, so it isn't going to run out anytime soon. Inside Russia, long-range Ukrainian strikes are ruining oil refineries, export terminals, and military nodes, which places more pressure on Russia's cash flow. In addition to weakening the Russian military inside Ukraine, there is degradation in the rear and death on the front. As its spring offensive ramps up, all of this is only going to get worse for Russia. We see that in the increased number of assaults that Russia started launching in March. For instance, the 4 days leading up to March 23rd saw Russia attempt over 600 assaults against Ukraine, which cost it 6,090 soldiers, the Kyiv Independent reports. That's a little over 1,522 Russian casualties per day, and it's a sign of what's to come. Multiply that number by 30 days and Russia's monthly losses veer close to 46,000. That's only a few thousand away from the rate of attrition that Ukraine says will be high enough to force Putin to end his war. Russia's leader is steaming toward 50,000 casualties per month, and he's doing it at a time when Russian recruitment is in shambles. None of this is sustainable. 89,000 soldiers confirmed as casualties in 3 months should show Putin that. But as always, he's so blinded by his invasion that he can't see the wood for the trees. Putin is leading his military into oblivion, and Ukraine is more than happy to hold his hand to guide him further down the path that he's following. Oh, and don't think for a second that Ukraine isn't constantly coming up with new and even better ways to turn the war around against Russia. Even Russia's long-range drone strategy, which is one of the few bright spots for the Kremlin, is being countered. Now, a Star Wars-like weapon is Ukraine's answer. You can find out all about it by checking out our video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to see more analysis of the numbers behind Putin's invasion. And thank you as always for watching.